everyone. Welcome to the Dignity Project Community Hub. I'm Kelsey Chapman, one of the researchers at the Hopkins Center Dignity Project. And today I'm joined by Louise Sauvage, a Paralympic athlete and coach for the New South Wales Institute of Sport wheelchair, track, and road program. So thanks for joining us today, Louise.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. I wanted to start off just by asking a little bit about your journey and some of your career highlights, if you don't mind sharing that with us.
Yeah, I suppose, I started out in wheelchair sports a very long time ago and then had a lot of success at a young age and ended up representing Australia at 4 Paralympic Games. And along the way, obviously did track and road races. So, yeah, all over the place, really. But, done really well in my chosen sport. So, very lucky to have the life I've had.
Yeah, and how did you get into track and road racing?
I started off obviously competing in sport at my school and then didn't really know anything about wheelchair sports at all. It wasn't until I was approached in a shopping centre by a lady who invited us to a come and try day pretty much for wheelchair sports. And then I think my world exploded from there and just found lots and lots of different sports that I really loved and yeah, got involved that way. So I was very fortunate to have that opportunity.
And what was it like representing your country at the Paralympics?
Yeah, I think the first time I represented Australia at Paralympics, I really wasn't sure what I was getting myself into, but but it was phenomenal to know that you'd worked so hard for such a long time and you were wearing the green and gold. I was so proud, and it was fantastic. But yeah, it was a whole new world, that's for sure. But yeah, it was a fantastic time, and obviously I've done it many times since.
Yeah, great. How has your journey and public profile shaped the person you are today?
I suppose for me, yeah, it has been a journey, definitely. I think when I first started out in sport, and you talk about public's perception, I was very much, I suppose, just, oh, isn't that fantastic? She's participating in sport kind of thing. They didn't really see it as elite or anything like that. So the perception of it and my journey has gone from um, people not knowing what Paralympic sport is all about or sport for people with disabilities at all to now, it's almost mainstream. I want to say that almost can always be better. But yeah, it's been phenomenal for me. And I suppose more than anything, I wanted people to know about me, about my sport, because I felt like that was the only way that we were ever going to get recognised and recognised for who we were as people, as athletes, and the athleticism that we had. So for me, it's been a massive journey to now see the fruits, I suppose, to a certain extent, with the athletes of today enjoying those rewards, getting the sponsors, getting recognised, being on the sports pages of the newspapers and in the sports reports on the news, that places where they deserve to be and don't have to fight to be. So that's kind of my journey, and now to see it all happen has been fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. And what are some of your top career highlights and some of your goals for the future?
Career highlights definitely, as an athlete, would have to be obviously competing at Paralympic Games. Sydney would have to be one of the biggest ones. I had the opportunity to compete in the Olympics in a demonstration event, and then the Paralympics afterwards, which of course, I think is the premier event. So yeah, winning gold in front of a home crowd, my family and friends for the first time was just phenomenal. So definitely a massive highlight of my career and something I'll never ever forget. I think on the roads kind of circuit, on the road racing scene, the Boston Marathon would have to be one of the biggest and toughest races that I continuously did for 9 years consecutively. I think you've got to be a bit mad to do a marathon in the first place, um, but yeah, that would have to be one of the other highlights. Winning that and having great rivalry with one of the American girls, Jean Driscoll. So it's just been a phenomenal time in my career.
What are some of your goals for the future now as a coach within, the New South Wales program, but also within the national program as well?
Some of my goals now as a coach, my ultimate goal is to coach a Paralympic gold medalist. I have so far coached world record holders, medalists in Paralympics, and world champions and gold medalist, as in world champion gold medalist, but not a Paralympic gold medalist. So that would be my ultimate goal. But I think more than anything as well is to continue to learn in my chosen sport, but also as a coach in general. There's so much to learn from other people and other coaches, and I find that's where I learn the most from as well. So for me, I think to definitely continue learning more than anything, but enjoy the journey and, see where it takes us.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to shift gears and just talk a little bit about dignity. Obviously, that's the focus of the research that we do, particularly for people with disability in Australia. What does dignity mean to you?
Yeah, I thought about this a little bit in terms of what does it truly mean to me. My dignity is, and I think this happens a lot in terms of, I think people with disabilities get judged a lot, and I have a very physical disability. It's very visual, so people judge you all the time. So for me, my dignity is just being treated like everybody else, I suppose, to a certain extent. Having the respect and being judged for me as a person, not necessarily how I appear, and that can be relatable to so many people, whether you have a disability or not. And we do it throughout our lives, and so for me, my dignity is just being respected for who I am.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a specific story or experience relating to dignity that you like to share that you think others might resonate or learn from?
A particular experience, I think more than anything, and I probably touched on this, is just um, I'm forever being judged by what I can and cannot do, and that's not judged by asking me what I can and cannot do, but judging just by my physical appearance. And I find that more frustrating than anything, that people assume that I can't do this or can't do that, and oh, heaven forbid, I actually do drive a car, but most people think I don't, and that I need a carer and things like that. And lots of people do. Everyone's very different, but I think more than anything, it gets very frustrating. And I suppose that realms down to your dignity and how you're treated in the community. It's quite refreshing when people, I find it, and I do appreciate it more than anything, when people ask and respect my decision as well, like saying, "Oh, do you need a hand with that?" Okay, and I say no, and they're like, "Oh no, no, give it to me, I'll help you." And I'm like, "Well, no, I said no. Please respect that. I was fine before." And sometimes when people do offer to help, they hinder more than they help, unfortunately. And it's hard because you're the one that ends up having to console them because you're trying to not be too nasty or not nice. So it sounds really awful, but yeah, sometimes help is not appreciated.
Yeah. And so many people have shared that experience with me where they have been offered help and say no. And it's either continue to be forced on them or people get frustrated that they've said no. And it's like, well, you don't know my situation or what I can, do on my own. Just because I have a disability that you can see or maybe not see doesn't mean that I need your help necessarily in this instance.
Yeah, I'm so glad I'm not the only person.
No.
Yeah, I think it's a constant thing that we have to battle with sometimes, and it is very frustrating. Um, but yeah, that's just, I think, human nature to a certain extent as well.
Yeah, yeah. Um, how do you work to advocate for dignity for yourself and others, particularly through your elite involvement in sport?
I think the biggest thing for me with advocacy is around education. So the more that people see people with disabilities or people in general with differences, then I think the more acceptance there is in the community. And it starts at the school level, and from kids right up to adults, of course, and an older generation, which sometimes can't get past accepting different things. But children are great. I mean, you often go to a shopping center or something like that, and they'll come straight up to you and say, "What's wrong with you?" or "Why can't you walk?" And I'm like, okay, well, it's good that you feel free to be out, and the parents kind of freak out and like, oh, don't say that. Oh, no, no, and they kind of really get flustered by it. But, you kind of explain to them, what's wrong with you to a certain extent. I don't think there's, and, I must say there's nothing wrong with me. What do you mean? I just don't walk around like you do. My legs don't work the same way yours do. And, they kind of stare at you for a while, ask a few more questions, and then they're okay. And off they go. So for me, the whole thing is about educating and being, I suppose, accessible to a certain extent as well, to make people feel comfortable. And you ask about particular instances. I suppose for me, one could be like even catching a taxi, and I'm not catching a specific disability taxi. I'm catching just a regular taxi, and my chair comes apart, and it's less than 10 kilos in weight, fits into a boot quite easily. But the taxi driver is also extremely fearful when he first sees you. How am I going to get in the taxi? How is he going to put the wheelchair in? And making that person feel really comfortable, and it was so easy for them. And the next time they have someone in the chair and go, oh, they feel more comfortable. Oh yeah, I had this passenger and they got in no problem, and they showed me how to do their chair and it was fine. And that kind of thing makes people feel more comfortable, and their next encounter or next person they see with a similar disability or something like that, they don't feel so bad. And for me, I think that's the important thing for me, is to be accessible and educate people.
Yeah, that's great. Do you think that that puts a lot of pressure on you, though? I suppose, like if you're having a bad day or you have a bad experience, that you don't then have that permission to just sort of be who you are and be feeling how you feel, or do you just go with how you feel that day?
Yeah, it is true. You can't be that open and accessible every time. And yeah, you could be having a bad day and don't want to share that particular time. And, I have friends that, who have disabilities and don't really like talking about their disability, and really are opposed to someone asking them about it. Where I'm not as opposed. I think there's a time and a place, definitely. And that sometimes can get a bit hard as well, trying to juggle. So yeah, it is a bit all over the place in terms of trying to be nice, but also trying to. There's a line between what you can say and what you can't say sometimes, and how people react as well. Um, some people just go down the wrong path and ask too many intrusive questions, and other people, are just like, oh, okay, no problem, and keep moving on. They'd love to ask another question, but don't. Um, I think I've done a lot of, in my time, I've done a lot of speaking in different groups and communities, and I relish, the opportunity to answer their questions that they're, burning to ask but never thought to. So, yeah, I think it can be difficult for some people as well as myself in different situations.
What piece of advice would you give to someone who doesn't have a disability in navigating those situations? Like, because as you say, some people like to be approached, and if you do it in a dignified way, then they might be happy, like you, to answer some questions, and some don't. What's your piece of advice to someone who sees someone out with a disability and decides, I might want to ask them something?
Um, I suppose most people don't go up to anyone just randomly. They might, I don't know, whether they would go up to them and just say, hey, how you doing? Or, if you're in a different situation, a sporting situation or in a social occasion, then, I think it's no problem to go up to someone and strike a conversation, and maybe they will get round to their disability, but maybe talk to them first as a person, um, rather than focusing solely on their disability. If you can see it, maybe it comes up in conversation and maybe it doesn't. But a lot of people like to relate. I mean, it's very frustrating. I hear this from a lot of other wheelchair users, that people go, oh, I know exactly what it was like. I was in a wheelchair for 4 weeks once. And it's like, I'm not sure you quite get it, but okay. Um, yeah, I've been in a chair my whole life, and yeah, you had an out of that after 4 weeks. So it is very different, but a lot of people can appreciate. I know a lot of new mums and dads that have new babies, and they have to get around with the pram suddenly and things like that. They look at me and have a new appreciation of how difficult it is with access. and that's obviously related very much to my disability and being in a wheelchair and having physical access. So I think a lot of people look at things differently, and so yeah, I think it's interesting how people bring up different subjects. But I think more than anything, it would be great if people talk to you as a person first.
Yeah, great. And that sort of access brings me to my next question. We are working closely at the moment with the Department of Main Roads and Transport in Queensland. And we're looking at improving accessibility, inclusion, and dignity for people with disability when accessing public transport. So I just was wondering if you could share some of your experiences and advocacy work in this area, because I know you have a couple of instances where you did have to advocate for yourself.
Yeah, unfortunately, I feel like every time I go to an airport and about to get on a plane, I'm ready for a fight almost, which is unfortunate. All different airlines have different policies, different disability policies, different way of doing things, which may or may not be great. I could say, to be really nice. In my situation, which it does get very, very frustrating if you don't know your rights and you don't know what happens on a regular basis. When traveling, you might accept different things. I've had so many occasions where obviously my chair, which is my legs and everything, has been either taken away from me, it's been damaged, it's been left at an airport, and obviously I've got to my destination, but I'm totally stuck. And they don't seem to realise that just an airport chair is not worthy. It's not. I can't get around. It's not the same. It's kind of a bit like someone, I don't know, wearing high heels, and if you're not used to it, you then going from a pair of runners to that is just, it just doesn't work, and they're 5 times too big, or it's very uncomfortable and it's not safe. So there's so many occasions that so many different things happen in airports, and that it's just not good, and just general public transport sometimes is very difficult also. I've lived in a number of capital cities, but some's, if you're catching trains or trams and things like that, it's a lot of them aren't accessible, or you have to really plan what is accessible, what isn't, and then perhaps you get to a train station and the elevator's out of order, and then you're kind of stuck again. So you have to jump back on another train to get to another station, and no one came to get you off the train if it wasn't a flat to get off. And there's so many things that it's a lot more planning and a lot more harder, I think. But things are changing slowly but surely. In the world, with regards to accessibility, obviously my access is very different to other people's access. So there's lots of different things that people struggle with different disabilities on public transport, and I can kind of appreciate some of them definitely, and others I will have no clue. So I can only speak on behalf of myself.
And so, what advice would you have to someone in a similar situation to yourself, in a wheelchair with a physical disability, who's navigating, let's say, airport travel for the first time? What are some ways that they can know their rights and make the journey easier for themselves?
There's actually a lot of recently. There's a lot more information online with regards to the first time you travel. A number of the airlines actually have some information on their actual wheelchair on travel if you're taking a mobility device with you. There's also some independent travel sites for people with disabilities as well that offer some information as well, which is fantastic. That was probably not around more 10 years or more ago. So it's been fantastic to see that evolve. So you can actually find out a fair bit of information with regards to that. But I think more than anything, you need to ask questions, but you also need to stick up for your rights and what you're comfortable with. If you're not comfortable doing something, then you need to find another way, or you need to talk to them and say, hey, I really can't do that. How else can we make this work for me? Or yeah, so I think more than anything, you need to be happy and comfortable, and do a little bit of research. If this is your first time traveling, maybe even talk to some other people who've already traveled a lot in chairs or with mobility devices, what they did. I've had a number of people ask me different things about that. So it's fantastic that people reach out and, how do you get to the airport? What happens when you get there? do they take your chair off you straight away? I'm like, no, take it all the way to the gate, have it gate checked. There's so many different things, and different countries do different things as well. So um, it's a bit of a gamut of many, many things, but there's opportunities to find out information and definitely talk to other people as well. Probably the best resource you'll have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One question I wanted to ask you in relation to that is, how do you think Australia compares to other countries? Obviously, you're a very savvy world traveler. How do we compare versus other countries in terms of that accessibility and dignity for people with disability?
I think we compare not too bad actually. I think you can have good days and bad days depending on staff as well, and I think that just goes, for anywhere in the world, I suppose. But we're not too bad. I think we can always do better though. Fortunately, or unfortunately, but yeah, we're not too bad when it comes to that. I think there are some cities and some places that are harder to get around in terms of just general public transport as opposed to airlines. But depending on the city and how new or old it is and the infrastructure that's available, it can be difficult to navigate. I often get very frustrated, just in general, finding out information sometimes, whether things are accessible or aren't. And they always say you have to call up. Well, why can't you just put the information there for me to look? And I have to call somebody, I have to find the right number. And I think with most people now, there's so many things that you can't call. Usually it's like, go to our website, and I'm like, well, I can't find any information on the particular question that I'm asked trying to find out about. So it can be a little frustrating in that respect, but I think Australia is not too bad. We have a lot more out there now, which is fantastic, and there's a market for it. So yeah, hopefully it will get bigger, and there'll be more people wanting the information, so they'll have to put it out there.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the best place you've ever been in terms of accessibility?
Ooh, good question. In terms of accessibility, I think the first time I ever went to the USA, it kind of blew my mind a little bit. I think their laws around having things that are accessible or access for different types of disability is a lot stricter than they are in Australia. So for me to go into almost any restaurant or um, buildings and things like that and have an accessible bathroom, just for one example, and it's compulsory. They have to have it. They have to have access and things like that. Was quite shocking. I mean, that was over 20 years or more ago that I did that, and it's still not the case here in Australia, but it's getting there. But that kind of blew me away a little bit that their discrimination laws are so much harsher, so they have to have more access and things like that. And again, it depends on the city and the country and the infrastructure. And I think the newer the place, the more accessible it is for a lot of people with different disabilities.
Yeah, okay. I'm just looking at my list of questions because I think we've covered most of them. Last question for you. What do you think needs to be done, let's say in the next 5 years, to ensure that everybody is treated with dignity and equitably in all aspects of life in Australia?
Ooh, that's a really hard one. I don't know whether I have the total answer there. Um, Recently I was on, a panel, and they were talking a lot about universal design. And universal design is something which is so refreshing to hear. And for me, it's just, I suppose, a vision in the future for me. And that is where anything new that's made or renovated or anything just has this universal design to make it just accessible and for everyone. And it kind of blows my mind to think that was something that could be for the future. And not just, often I get told, well, there is access, you just have to get someone to go in and ask and come back out, and then they'll get the key and they bring you around the back. That's not access to me. Access is independent access. And it's the same access for everyone. I don't want to go in a back door and go around the back and through the kitchen just to get to the same spot. I want to come into the same building with my friends, my family, and then have the same experiences and be treated like everyone else. And I suppose that goes back to your dignity and being treated for being a person. I'm a person first. I happen to be a person with a disability, and that's okay. I'm not ever going to shy away from that because that's who I am. But I think everyone needs to be treated as a person and who they are.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's very powerful. Thank you for sharing that. And thanks for making time for us today.